So yeah, we're fixing the nation one conversation at a time, everywhere on TV, on radio, on our digital platforms. This morning we're having a conversation about the AUC chairperson's position in Addis Ababa tomorrow. It's Eric Latif, Mariam Bishar, and Janet Bogwa. Remind us again, who said what?
Who said what? You should see. You should see me multitasking from phone to X to talking up our next guest. But there's actually quite a number of people in the comments who have been able to guess who said that. I don't know whether we should hold that for now or proceed. So in the comments, I can see quite a number of you have guessed who it is. I talked about him being one of the presidents of the US. Think of president number 28. Now you see, I'm giving it away. People will quickly Google. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Who said that? Who said that?
Do what you can with what you have where you are.
Was it one of
American president?
Yes. And 3 people in the comments have it.
Oh, is it one of the Roosevelts?
Yes.
Okay. Now to guess between which one?
Yes.
The first one.
Theodore.
Teddy.
Yes.
Okay.
Teddy. There you go. Star Kenya, I'm Justified, and Timothy Omondi all said it is Theodore Roosevelt. Even Sakina Latif. So thank you. A lot of you are historians. We need to just form a quotes club.
Yeah.
Because me sometimes I speak in quotes and parables and metaphors. I love it. But that's who said what, and we'll see whether our next guest will be able to tease it. But for now, we're still talking about the AUC chair candidacy race, and I believe that we have somebody on the line who can give us some context. Eric.
Right.
Yes, indeed. Macharia Kamau, Ambassador Macharia Kamau is Kenya's former principal secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has previously served as Kenya's representative to the United Nations, where he midwifed the Sustainable Development Goals. He has also served as a former president of UNICEF Executive Board. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the line. And we know you are on the X space as well, so you know the conversation that we've had so far. We're still asking you from that main question. From a diplomatic standpoint, what's the importance of Kenya putting forth candidates for these global positions?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. Just to say that it is important that we're in these global positions for the simple reason that we are part of the global community. And Kenya has to play its role in that global community. So I am actually pleased that Kenya has undertaken this challenge, that Raila Odinga has seen it fit to put himself up as a candidate, and I wish him all the very best. I've been listening to the conversation, and I must say it's been very interesting to hear people's views. And I think it really is true that there has been a major generational change in the expectations of what these candidatures mean for countries. People expect people to go out there to be performers, to be going to represent the interests of Kenyans and of the region, and they expect them to be candidates who can deliver and have a clear mandate and a clear policy which they wish to pursue. So I think all these are important things, but the reality is that the AU candidature is a very technical process. The whole campaign is not about numbers. You can have 1,000 people in Addis. It means absolutely nothing. What is important is what you have done working with various countries prior to the day of the voting. And as you have pointed out, the voting is by heads of state in a closed room, a secret ballot. So, you know, having people running up and down hallways who are not able to influence the heads of state is a complete waste of time. The strategy of electing people in the international system is complex, and it involves a lot of alchemy, diplomatic alchemy, which I think a lot of times is lost on a lot of people. So let me just stop there for now, and then you can ask me whatever questions you have. Go ahead.
All right. This alchemy, where does Kenya fall in it? You know, in your opinion, our international standing especially just within the continent. And I don't want it to be like from an odds perspective of numbers of SADC versus, West Africa or Muslim Africa, quote unquote, but more just from a diplomatic point of view. Where do we fall in this alchemy of all these factors and all these strategies as a country?
It's a good question. You see, you can't run away from those dimensions, of certain groupings and certain alliances coming into play. That you cannot run away from. It's a reality of international elections. But the alchemy is about understanding the psychology of those groups and what is motivating them to vote, either internally for their candidate or externally for an external candidate. It is, and it wanes. I mean, sometimes you have a country can have the right people in the right jobs who understand global politics, regional politics, who have invested in the relationships, because you just can't rock up a month or two before the elections and say, hey, I have a great candidate, please vote for him. You have to have built a relationship with these countries, with these blocks of countries, to give them the feeling that, hey, this guy who's coming from Kenya is a great guy, and they understand him, they feel him, and they know his legacy. We assume a lot in Kenya that people are alive to our politics. We assume a lot. Yes, it's true. I heard earlier that the Gen Z absolutely put us on the global map, and people have come to say there is a political vibe in Kenya that is special. But remember, when the previous heads of the AU were elected, I don't think any of us knew really who they were, what they represented, what their local politics are. So we should never assume that the vibe that Baba creates here in Kenya translates to a vibe anywhere outside of Kenya. This is an assumption that doesn't hold any water. So it is for us to go out there, position our candidate, make sure the various groupings are in place, make sure they see the value of Kenya, make sure they understand the value of our candidate, and then move ahead to make sure that he gets elected.
Right. Ambassador, yeah. I hear you. I think you just talked about, what we mentioned earlier, which is that there's a political vibe from Kenya that people are awake to. And I don't know whether you can speak to sort of like the motivation behind this candidacy and whether it is perhaps linked to trying to work on fixing the local Kenyan politics and enhancing that trust, especially given the Gen Z-led protests, or is it more about suitability, which I know we've talked about the fact that Raila Odinga, many have said, yes, he is the kind of candidate that many can say is suitable. I'm just curious about the motivation, and if the motivation is perhaps in a sense to also try and rebuild the trust that he may have lost, especially with a lot of young people in the country. Is that, your thoughts on that, whether that sometimes is still a very fair motivation or whether the motivation is greater than that and really about saying we are putting Kenya on the map?
First of all, let me say that I think that Raila Odinga is a Pan-Africanist. He has a regional profile in East Africa. He is a known entity in West and Southern Africa. So his motivations for me go back to his early days in politics and his positioning of Pan-Africanist ideas in our politics, in Kenya's politics. So I think as an individual, he is a legitimate candidate. What has, I think, colored the whole debate is the manner in which the strategy, remember about the diplomatic alchemy I spoke about, the manner in which the strategy of positioning him on the continent has been so driven by local political dynamics. And I think this has gotten a lot of people worried and has raised many shackles about why is he in the race. But to be honest, I think he's legitimately in the race. I think he's a legitimate candidate. Age might not be his best friend right now, but I think his performance, his intensity, his viability as a thinker on African issues is real. And I know sometimes I'm a Kenyan, so I know how cynical we can be about our leaders, and yes, for good reason. But I think when we are playing on the continental and on the international stage, it's very important that we leave our domestic political baggage at home. Because the moment we drag this political baggage into the regional or global stage, we humiliate ourselves, we embarrass ourselves, we undermine ourselves. So we have to understand that there's a way to play global politics, there's a way to play continental politics, and then, of course, tuna siasa zetu huku nchini, and that's okay as well.
Yeah.
Ambassador, in 2017, Kenya nominated Ambassador Dr. Amina Mohamed for this same position, and the vote went the way it went. Again, Kenya nominated her for the position of WTO boss. The vote went the way it went. Do you think that we have taken the lessons of those two into this particular campaign?
Well, I should hope so. It's a very good question. I mean, we did not succeed in those last two campaigns, and we had an excellent candidate in Amina Mohamed. Particularly for the AU seat, I think she was well positioned, even for WTO, because of her experience in Geneva, where she had spent a lot of time on various portfolios, including in Kenya. So for the AU, I think it's fair to say that, and this is where the diplomatic alchemy story comes in, I think it's fair to say that there was a strategic mistake that was made at the very last days and weeks of that campaign, which had to do with how we vocalize our intentions once we get into the job. And this is nothing personal, it's just the way it turned out. And I think that played out rather negatively among our constituency in North and West Africa. And it came to haunt us on the day of the elections. But I think we were really the front runner until the very last minute. WTO was more complex and I think more difficult to understand what happened there. I think we have learned those lessons. I think Raila Odinga has been more reticent. He has been more careful not to overstate his intentions about what he will or can or cannot do once he's in power, because everybody sees it from a different angle. You may say, oh, you know, I want to increase the freedom of people in our continent, blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, people react to that statement as an affront on their local politics or as an affront on their regional dynamics. So I think we did learn lessons. Where I'm not so sure we really we really understood properly is that some of our local politics have seeped out into our regional, in the community dynamics, our regional politics, but has also, after the Gen Z events, been seen from a continental level, and that has created other reverberations that are going to affect the voting. But to be honest, I wish him well. I hope that he wins. Kenya needs to win. Remember, he's a Kenyan candidate. And we need to take up that responsibility because I think it's our turn and it's our time. Thank you.
Ambassador Macharia Kamau, former Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs, who has also been Kenya's representative at the UN and in other diplomatic positions. Thank you for speaking to us. If you're able to just stay on the line, you can hear what Duncan Haemba is going to tell us of what's happening in Addis Ababa. Duncan, you're on the X space and you've got the mic. Bring us up to speed now, Duncan, in terms of the arrival of Raila Odinga and his team and the president and what they've been doing. Do you think, like what Ambassador Macharia Kamau has told us, there's been a risk of spoiling that vote in the last minute?
Yes, good morning, Eric and the crew. I hope now you can hear me loud and clear. A lot is happening, and this is largely attributed to the...
We lost him again.
Amina Mohamed was tough then I think this one is tougher, and that really explains the dynamics. And the early arrival of the Kenya's candidate Raila Odinga yesterday, as well as President William Ruto on Thursday, while they're here they will remain here until Saturday or Sunday morning for the president. And then I think it explains what why they are really determined to make sure they bag this seat for Kenya. This is strategic. Why? The presidents that it takes long for them to fly into Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Many of them will start arriving this afternoon. By President William Ruto arriving here, it means he wants to meet his peers as soon as they land, to know where they are, to try and do that last-minute lobbying. And definitely they will be moving with Raila Odinga. That could be the reason why President William Ruto has come early, because ordinarily he leaves Nairobi early on Saturday because it's 1 hour flight, and then he's here for the meeting. And then for President Uhuru Kenyatta, actually to the end, remember on in 2018 January, the mock swearing in of Raila Odinga, President Uhuru Kenyatta flew to Addis for the meeting in the morning, then in the evening he was back home. So the fact that President William Ruto has come early, I think it's just to do that final lap or round one-on-one with his peers, with his candidate Raila Odinga. Again, Eric, last evening what happened is that there was a planned meeting at the Sheraton Hotel. President William Ruto and Raila Odinga were supposed to have a reception, and then which was on Kenya's Shirika Plan for Refugee Integration, basically the blueprint for the refugee integration. That event was cancelled last minute for the lobbying to continue and all that. But some look at it like they opted to just to make sure that they keep their cards close to their chest. Maybe that could be the reason why that event was cancelled, because the target audience was actually the foreign affairs ministers, heads of diplomatic missions, Permanent Representatives Committee of the African Union, UN agencies, and donor development partners. The reason could be because the voters in tomorrow's election were not attending. Maybe that is the reason why they decided to cancel that event the last minute, because until 5, the event was on, which was starting at 5:30. So it was dramatically cancelled. That is what basically is happening. The lobbying continues. It will be high. It will be high gear in the run-up to tomorrow's meeting. I'm not sure whether they will be asleep tonight, because the president will be jetting in different hours from early afternoon until late in the evening, until late into the night, even tomorrow morning. Eric.
So the other person that we have online is Wahome Waringa from the Mathare Justice Center, but she's also very, very vocal on matters of, African Union and Pan-Africanism. Wahome Waringa, you have the mic, and you can mute it so we can hear you. What's your take on this, on Kenya's participation in this, on the way you've seen the three candidates campaigning, and our chances in this, Waringa?
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard clearly.
You can be heard, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think, yes, my name is Waringa, and I think the most important thing that we need to analyze while we look at Raila's candidature is, number one, what is Pan-Africanism? What does Pan-Africanism constitute? And also, if there were to be a win, who would the win be for? Would it be a win for the people, or would it again be a win for, the neocolonial masters who have consistently captured the African Union? I think first is that Pan-Africanism in itself cannot be Pan-Africanism if we do not discuss the, political and social economic questions that are surrounding Africa. If you look at Ababa, for example, in essence, actually, Pan-Africanism must rule out that the people of Africa are struggling, the people of Africa continue to be held by neocolonial shackles, and the people of Africa are facing poverty, but it's not poverty that is because out of the laziness of African people. It is poverty that is man-made and created by, our colonial masters. And I think, but not masters very much so, it's mostly because they are the people that want to benefit out of Africa's resources and out of African people and its ideas and, developments. Raila himself is not, I think, an embodiment of Pan-Africanism, as has been previously espoused. Raila is someone who most people, including myself, are embarrassed. We are ashamed of Raila because Raila continues to defend. In fact, even if he were to win this position in the AU, he would just continue defending, corruption, but now corruption on an international scale. Because if you look at the AU itself, AU is a captured organization. It is somewhat, I wouldn't call it entirely toothless, but it has been captured by colonial and neo-colonial structures of governance. If you look at the funding of the AU, it's mostly coming from USA, it's mostly coming from Britain, it's mostly coming from Japan, and the fact that it is funded by these people that have continually extracted out of Africa means that there is no possibility that Raila's win is a win for the people. Raila's win will be a win for people that he will continue to cut deals for. And even if you look at his participation in national politics, if it is not a question of tribal or ethnic mobilization, he has failed completely to build a Pan-Africanist movement or a political movement, even in Kenya and East Africa, that can help to breathe life and a vision. Even what Mwalimu Nyerere stood for, even advance the agendas of the AU. And when previously we were talking about Kenya being even part of the Human Rights Council, Kenya having international positions. I think we must do a correct analysis. Look at, even while Kenya has all these positions internationally, does Kenya espouse a space where respects human rights and social justice? I think not, because we are still talking about abductions. We are still talking about murder of young people in our country. We are still addressing, theft of public resources. So again, it is not a win for the people. It is not an advancing of the struggles of the African people. It does not advance the struggles of, the Kenyan people. And again, it is not a candidature of Kenya.
All right. When you say
it is a candidature of
Sorry, when you say he doesn't espouse, Pan-Africanism to you, does any of the other candidates, whether it's Mahmoud or the candidate from Madagascar, espouse Pan-Africanism to a larger extent than Raila Odinga, or if he doesn't do it at all? Is there someone who fits the bill for you, or in your opinion?
No, because look at Congo. There is a genocide going on in Congo. But Raila is out there Raila in his campaign trails was visiting Kagame and speaking publicly. In fact, even Rwanda supporting Raila. And the other candidates, like you said, they've not been around the world, but they've also not spoken about Congo. And there's a genocide that is going on in Congo. No one is talking about Sudan. No one is talking about the struggles of the African people. They're only talking about how they will continually defend the spinelessness of, even the leadership, although it has many, many limitations. No one is talking about the genocide that is going on in Congo. No one is talking about the struggles of the people of Sudan. No one is talking about what is going on in South Africa and all these places. And even in Kenya in itself, no one is talking about, how the human rights and social justice violations that are going on in this country. And those are the questions that they need to address so that we can tell that this position is not actually a position where they're just, in benefit either of what Eric had said earlier, saying that in a description saying that it is a career that he has formed. It is a career that they have all formed from, from people's struggles. They have formed a political career for themselves that somewhat benefits themselves and, a particular class of society. But the duty of every single person that thinks of running for such a political position, it should be a duty that is geared to the people. It should be a win that is felt to be a win for the people. And what impact is AU, Raila or any of those people winning the AU position to somebody who has right now in, let's say, a place like Madane, where they have continually experienced poverty. Right now, people are running for positions of AU, but still not addressing the nature of poverty in this country.
Yeah.
No one is addressing how horrible conditions people are living in this country. The healthcare system is completely horrible. The education system, everyone, the university students are planning to have protests around how horrible the education system in Kenya is.
All right. Well,
so I think it is a duty so that people can,
Sorry, no, just to stop you, but I think we do get the gist of your argument. Maybe it's for us to interrogate the seat itself, the qualifications for it, the candidates that are being brought forth, and to have a discourse around that. But we do hear you, and I want to throw it back to the ambassador now, because those are legitimate concerns with what's happening on the continent. As opposed to doing a campaign trail and going from country to country saying vote for me, espousing a Pan-Africanism would be what is happening in Congo, what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in Kenya, etc. Ambassador, what do you think about that?
I think those are very legitimate concerns, and I think that will always be a challenge. But let's understand, first of all, how many of us really know what's going on in Djibouti or what's going on in Madagascar? And how will that influence any of the votes that that are going to be pushed for the candidates from those countries? As I said earlier, we must not assume that the rest of the continent understands our politics. So that's one point I really need to leave out there. But I do want to remind people that the chairperson of the African Union is a secretariat role. They are really not, it's not really a political role as such. It's not somebody who's going to drive political actions on the continent. It is somebody who's going to serve the bigger interests of the leadership of Africa and tries to provide coherent responses of the African Union. So it's more of a facilitating role than of a political leadership role. So a lot of times you'll find, in fact, Raila is an oddball in that regard because he's probably the most political of leaders who has put his hat in the race. Normally, it's people who come from a ministerial perspective. I mean, who heard of the current chairperson before he was chairperson? He was a very rare player in the African continent, and he was picked only because he had already established his credibility working with governments and ministries around the continent. So a long way of saying that we must ask ourselves, what is it that the chairperson of the African Union is hired to do, and who is he hired to serve? And yes, it would be great if they could speak aggressively, and they do once they get into the job. And some of them are very articulate in trying to bring certain positions to the world, but they usually work on positions that have consensus among the leadership of Africa, not issues that are driven by their own perceptions about what is right or wrong on the continent. And I do agree that Congo is a major concern. I do agree that Sudan is a major humanitarian crisis. And I do agree that we have challenges with Pan-Americanism becoming a factor in African politics, particularly in South Africa. But these are challenges that you pick up once you are in the job, if you have the mettle and the political belief to deliver on those issues. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I perceive that. One has to manage that before they get into the job. And then once you're in the job, you engage differently.
All right. Ambassador, thank you. Thank you for those contributions. I think you've sort of sufficiently answered because earlier, obviously, what our previous speaker was saying is that, no, it has to be an embodiment of so many other, you know, the confidence on the continent as opposed to just a ceremonial seat. Ambassador, thank you for that. We have Mwangi Maina, award-winning African journalist, who can also come in. And Mwangi, I'm curious, I'm sure you've been following the conversation, trying to speak to this specific race, trying to speak to which candidate perhaps supersedes the other with regards to how they feel they can really drive this very prestigious seat, whether or not there are deeper issues that really, really need to be unpacked, and whether we're perhaps missing the mark by saying this seat should be for Raila Odinga, despite the fact that there isn't a lot of confidence, at least locally, in his leadership.
Right.
Thank you so much for having me. one thing people have to understand is this is not a Kenyan seat, and this is not it's not an East African community seat. It's a seat that is reserved for the East African region as a whole. And we will need to also understand that the East African region and the African Union politics comprises of about 14 capitals, from Nairobi to Asmara in Eritrea to Seychelles and so many other countries. What Balozi Macharia Kamau raises is a very critical point, that at times we want to, bring a lot of political razzmatazz and a lot of political noise from the Kenyan political scene. I've heard Haemba talk about parliamentarians, about 100 of them, or 50 thereabouts, who are about to get to Addis Ababa to go and see our own Baba, Raila Odinga, to be able to look for votes. We have to understand that support is inconsequential, because as the previous speakers have put it, is that the constituency that is going to vote is that of 49 African leaders who... Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead.
Mwangi, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We
Yes,
can
we
hear
can.
you, Mwangi. Go ahead.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Continuation, people need to understand that the constituency of leaders who are going to vote is not Kenyans or Djiboutians. It's a constituency or a group of 49 African leaders who will sit down to vote, and it will be a secret ballot. But most importantly is that Nairobi is also giving a bit of some mixed signals from Addis Ababa. If you saw the kind of statements that are coming from there, that are being issued by the Kenyan Foreign Minister, Musalia Mudavadi. I believe that Nairobi, in one or the other, is showing an air of tension and a bit of diplomatic anxiety, because the recent statement that has been issued is that Kenya is calling on the continent and warning the continent against any postponement of this particular vote. This speaks volumes into what Addis Ababa, or the kind of diplomatic activities are happening in Addis Ababa. Nairobi is fearing that in case of anything, in case of any lack of a majority, a 2/3 majority, then this election will be postponed to July of this year. If you followed what happened during the elections of the African Union Peace and Security Council, there are two countries, as Balozi Macharia Kamau talked about, of course, that brought a very wide influence in terms of how Amina Mohamed bid was perceived. In 2017, the North Africans' rivals, that is Algeria and Morocco. Morocco and Algeria were going for the same position on Wednesday. That is the membership of the African Union Peace and Security Council. But nobody got that seat because there was a deadlock. And when countries do abstain in the final round, then simply means if you have 15 or 20 countries abstaining, then you won't be able to get an African Union chairperson. So this is about Nairobi being able to convince the leaders of the continent, the 49 African leaders. Of course, President William Ruto will be the first one to make that symbolic vote in favor of his former political nemesis, Tandala, now Raila Odinga. Crucially important is also us to understand that, from where I sit, I have covered this whole African Union Commission bid, how it was announced, how the endorsement has been done, the kind of campaigns that have been run. And clearly it's about, domestic political scores and not about technocratic reasons, because, Africa is a continent of a billion people, over a billion people. It has over 500 million youth, yet we are fronting a candidate who just turned 8 years, 8 years old recently. So the kind of job Raila Odinga is going to have is purely not political, it's technocratic. He needs a technocrat to be able to become the engine of the African Union Commission. You are running the back scenes, the backdoor stuff that any other chief executive officer is running in any other company. Yeah, so it's about us to realize that it's not about pushing domestic politics at the continental level. We are still playing our diplomacy. We are still viewing our diplomacy as if we are playing our domestic politics. And this might also, make other countries to steer clear from our candidate because they might think we are more or less bringing a power grab in terms of wanting to push our own national interests. If Raila goes to African Union Commission, if he becomes the chairperson, then simply he won't be representing the interests of the Kenyan government. He won't be representing the interests of the Kenyan people.
Thank you,
He
Mwangi.
will be representing the interests of the African people because this is an African seat and not a Kenyan seat.
All right.
Back to you, Latif.
Mwangi, thank you for that, and thank you for the perspective that you've given, being it that you have covered this particular journey all the way from the moment Kenya announced the presentation of a candidate up to now. And we want to open the line to everybody who would like to contribute. If you'd like to contribute to this conversation, just a request for the mic. And we're going to look at how many people we can afford to give the mic to speak in the remaining time. But as we talk about this, there's so many questions that come in. Maybe even Ambassador Macharia Kamau and Mwangi, because you've covered it, you can come in and tell us.
Yeah.
There's a question of what do you promise?
Mm-hmm.
In every campaign, there's a promise that you make.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, we want to put forth this position. This is how we shall benefit you should you vote for us, right? What is that? What are those promises that maybe we have made in this particular campaign? And do they make sense? Do those promises have any implication on us as a country?
Right.
Latif,
just have an implication.
Seems like I lost you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mwangi.
Mwangi, we'd love to know if you're privy to any of the promises that were made as part of Raila Odinga's campaign for the AUC chairmanship. And what they mean for us. All right.
You seem to have lost him. So if you'd like to request the mic, please go ahead, request the mic, and then we'll give the mic to several people to just, let's open up the conversation, let's open up the floor, let's hear perspectives. Mm-hmm. This is mic qua space. So
I like that.
You'll get the mic. Let's hear what your perspective. Do you think there'd be any promises that are made that would have impact Kenya?
That's a great question, to be honest. I think there would be promises made. How much they affect us, I think certainly there will be, a give and take situation. Here, this is my job as AUC chair. This is my promise. Would that come as a cost to Kenyans directly? I don't think so. I think the biggest cost is already how much we've spent in the campaign period. But let's get back on the phone lines. What we spent to the campaign is what I'm worried about.
Obed Zoriko is on the line, international relations, policy and governance enthusiast. Obed, let's start with that. From what you see in this particular campaign, is there any likelihood that a candidate would go and make a promise that would impact their country because they are making a promise on things that you do globally? I think Obed has an issue with the mic. We also have Francis Lendira, who's here. Francis, if you can hear us, let's see if you're able to speak. Also that not coming in. So if you'd like to request a mic, request, and let's see if we can give you. Bev Ngoge has also requested a mic, and we have handed in the mic. Let's see who is able to come in and speak. But as they do that, I mean, they all had manifestos, and I think that's essentially the promises that they made. Earlier, I was just mentioning some of the highlights from Raila's AUC manifesto that speaks to, well, to answer both your questions in terms of how it affects us locally. I know quite a bit of it was Pan-African unity and integration, social justice and human rights. So it's a champion inclusive policies that address long-standing social and political disparities. There was also youth empowerment and technological innovation. So prioritizing programs that empower Africa's youth. And mine are just then, one of the last things he said is that disparity. Our
candidate is, he's not giving youth.
He's non-youth is what we can say.
Not youth adjacent.
Not youth adjacent. There's been some interesting points raised, I think. And I thought about it, even as everybody was contributing. I really thought about this move for patriotism. But I think when things are not pragmatic for me, as a Kenyan, as an African, patriotism becomes secondary.
Right.
Which it shouldn't be the case. But let's talk to lived realities of people on the continent. They're very similar. They are poverty, they are corruption, they are extrajudicial killings, lack of accountability and transparency in many African countries. This is not to discount globally. Globally, we still have the same massive issues in other countries. We're talking about this because it is, and so people almost now have to put pragmatism before patriotism. And that's what's informing a lot of where people are coming from, is saying, I want to be patriotic. In fact, maybe I am.
I want to root for you.
I want to root for you, but I need to consider everything that I'm having to deal with on my plate, which doesn't allow me to do that. And I think one of the people who said that pretty well on YouTube, I believe, he said, I would love for Kenya to win, but patriotism alone doesn't progress the continent. In my opinion, Raila has the right outlook, as long as he doesn't know, as long as he doesn't also sort of bow to Western powers, and that he is very guilty of, which was mentioned earlier. Very impassioned, kind of like points that were raised earlier about like, sympathizers of colonialism must all be completely deconstructed. So that patriotism push is perhaps the one thing that we could have really pegged our hopes on. But where is the practicality
of patriotism?
Patriotism won't feed me alone.
It won't. It really
patriotism
won't.
Alone. Yes. Patriotism alone will not help me navigate my way out of the issues I find myself grappling with. Not to discount it, but that's kind of where I think it...
It's a catch-22. I would love to be a patriot.
I think it's just our political blood that brings its issues here.
Okay.
Do we ever sit back and say, Ati Kipchoge, London Marathon? Why Eliud? My patriotism will not push for Eliud. I can look for another candidate.
Because Eliud has never given me reason to question him. Consistent king.
What is the point you're making?
Question his prowess in the marathon.
His prowess
question in running.
And his ethics.
And how he got there.
And how he got there. And I've never been like, Eliud, how did you get here? Eliud, did you compromise it? No. Those are not questions I have.
Even if he did, would you now sit back and say, no, me as a Kenyan, I want Eliud to lose?
I think...
Wow, okay.
I'm going to... I think the last 8, however, months... I keep going back to, let's not assume that there hasn't been a fundamental shift. I do believe we will continue to question everybody, even beyond politicians. There's a massive audit going on. And it may come back to affect somebody who maybe did not get didn't win the race on account of their talent and gift alone and their transparency. If they didn't, I think that's going to be put into question. I don't think we're not going to go back to people being blind.
We have seen
what
athletes.
have we seen it with other than politicians?
We have seen athletes who have been banned, Kenyan athletes, on account of doping.
True.
Okay? We have seen athletes who've been stripped of their wins on account of doping. I have not heard Kenyans say, Kenya hatuache kwenda Olympics, sisi ni dopes, or dopers, or dopamines, whatever, we're dopies.
And I hear you, I get what you're saying, but the politics versus sport, like it's not the same.
The stakes are so different.
The stakes are very different.
That's what I said.
Apples and oranges.
You're saying we need to have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Sisi wa Kenya, when it comes to politics, something else is injected into our blood.
It's probably our very valid anger and frustration.
Right. That is already in there. It's not even injected. It's in the blood.
Our internal tribalism. We spoke to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, who's also the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, who's obviously in Addis Ababa now participating in this particular AU summit that's going on. He will not be a voter. It's the president who will be voting tomorrow. But he asked Musalia Mudavadi, there's a lot of work that his ministry has done to campaign and facilitate Raila's campaign secretariat to campaign for this. First of all, have we done enough? Second, why? Why did we spend so much effort and time, and most importantly for Kenyans now, money to campaign for this? And this is what he said.
The first thing I want to say that Kenya has put in a lot of effort in reaching out to all the AU member countries. And for the last several months, President Ruto has reached out to virtually every head of state, whether it is in the north, the south, the central part of Africa, the west, or the east. He has talked to his colleagues directly in his support for the Honorable Raila Odinga to take up the position of AUC chairperson. We are putting a lot of emphasis in this because, one, Africa Union requires strong leadership, and the term of the outgoing Musa Faki has come to an end. So it's important that we have somebody who has experience, somebody who understands Africa with strong Pan-African credentials, somebody who will be able to engage all at peer level. And this is something that Raila Odinga brings on the table. Apart from that, Raila himself has also worked with the African Union as the High Representative responsible for infrastructure. So this is another critical thing. Now, what are the implications? I want to state that we need to have a stable African Union. And for Kenya, President Ruto is champion for the African Union reforms. So it would be a very big advantage from an operational viewpoint if Raila is head of the AUC, because then they would be able to work and coordinate very, very effectively on matters that require reform within the African Union. And indeed, there are several issues that have been identified, and that will be the subject of a conversation later on. The other thing is that it will enhance Kenya's diplomatic standing. It will give Kenya greater leverage in being able to help resolve certain critical issues that affect Africa. And at this point in time, high on the agenda is the question of peace and security, where we are seeing so many conflicts in the region. It is important that there's firm, dedicated leadership to deal with that. The other thing that is also critically important at this stage is that we want to have a leadership that will promote Africa integration, promote institutions of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, focus on how Africa can better place itself, bearing in mind there are a lot of geopolitics that are completely taking the global scene by storm, if I may use that. So as we speak today, there are 49 countries that are eligible to vote, and they're all already represented in Addis. There are about 35 heads of state who are expected, several prime ministers, some vice presidents, and also delegations led by their foreign ministers. I also want to indicate that Raila himself has equally campaigned very, very extensively, and even as late as yesterday, he had just come back from Burundi. I, as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, have also reached out very, very extensively for several months to my colleagues in the various countries. So apart from this, our ambassadors, our diplomats in various headquarters have also been engaging in the campaign.
Well, that's the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Foreign Affairs CS saying, this is the work that they've done. This is the position that, the government has taken. You've put in all this effort. You are going in here feeling that you've done the best that you could for this particular job, and saying there's a lot of work that needs to be done at the African Union level, just like at the United Nations level. It's all about talking about reforms and reforming the institutions and all. Do you think any of that, to you, do you think any of that matters?
So, given the conversations that we've just had, and I love the Prime CS's really positive outlook, and he's given us, context, like you said, for what the government has done. But given the conversation we've just had, especially with Ambassador Macharia, again, our politics is not Africa's politics, right? Our standing with ourselves is not necessarily how the continent sees us. Our wishful thinking may not translate as far as this is concerned. So I do hear what the Prime CS is saying, and I think all these things do factor in, but I'm still stuck on, is that how the rest of the continent views it? The same faith we have in ourselves, does the continent have in us? This Pan-African outlook we seem to give Raila Odinga, is that what the rest of the continent sees him as? And it seems to be a really big, there seems to be a disconnect somewhere there, or maybe the votes will tell. There could be, there could not be. I think the votes will be the ones to decide. But yeah, the work has been done, fair enough. But yes, have we overestimated our position in the continent, or even our standing? That's my question.
The work has been done, and it remains to be seen if it's enough. I think there's a theme that I'm hearing come out, and that's whether there's a shift in what Pan-Africanism means. Because I think it was about the spirit of amplifying and elevating the people of Africa, and about sort of like that then leading to this interrelations and relationships between African countries and regions. But I think over time, there's a revolution that has happened that sometimes seems to be, that sometimes a lot of the leaders seem to be unaware of, or would rather still have a very sort of like privileged lens when going for seats like this. Whereas I think there's a sense now that says if you are going to pursue this kind of position, then you need to be able to vouch for the people of Africa, and you need to do it by putting your lens, your privileged lens aside. There was a mention about some of the crises that are happening on the continent that hasn't been raised. Granted, I'm sure there's several political and sort of other layers to it, but I think that's the shift that people are saying is being missed in all of this.
Agreed.
Is that shift away from something that appears to be more and more and more ceremonial, and less about what the continent needs, even though the three candidates, or these top candidates, everybody's saying the same thing. They are ideal for it. You know, Raila Odinga is qualified for this. Nobody's discounting that on paper. What is the motivation and intention behind what happens once you're there? Are you going to kind of drive us into a new era of patriotism, which means that you put the privileged lens down?
Right.
This
No. But the comments are coming in really, really hot and fast, and I do agree with you. The shift is not catching up. Kunaka, you know, something is happening somewhere. But people are really feeling that the AU seat is showing the world who we are. We have shown our true colors, and I'm seeing that sentiment coming through over and over again, especially on YouTube. King Anthony says most of the work is about persuading African states to pass the right business interrelational policies that would then hold them in adherence with like international standards, etc. Right? But still begs the question: if this person is meant to be a Pan-African candidate, then yes, some of these things should have been addressed in the campaign, even if it's a secretarial role and less political. Those are things we still can't ignore if you are meant to be any symbol of unity for a whole continent. Ausio.
Okay. I'll see you. See what you did. Obed Zariku is online, and he has requested a mic, and he's a speaker. Obed, you've got the mic. What's your input on this? Obed, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. Oh, he's back to being a listener. So we can continue. We'll give him the mic shortly. But we're coming to the end of this conversation. But we've had very, very many comments and people engaging here and sharing their views and thoughts on this particular one. I think it's just that balance, and I like the angle that Warenga brought in of, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, do we have of the best from Eastern Africa?
And she said nope.
Right? And so what would that look like? And how can we start, all just looking at it from understanding this is what the ideals of Africa would be, so that the person who gets in there is still advancing that. Then there's the other angle that she brought in, that there's the perception and the feeling by many that the AU is not Africa's. It's not owned and controlled by Africans. It's funded externally, outside of Africa. It's then therefore controlled externally, outside of Africa. How independent is the African Union? How African is the African Union? And so when we see the candidates being fronted there, who is actually fronting these candidates to the African Union Commission and all? Is it the person who controls the purse? or is it the independent African states?
Right. That's a great question.
Many questions. This debate continues. We thank you, everybody who's joined us on this X space today. We had a few technical issues. You know, this is week 2 of Fixing the Nation. Many conversations will come, many conversations. We're still sorting out very many things. There are people who said, yeah, sometimes your audio, yeah, we're sorting it out. Today was sometimes the X-Space is dropping and coming on. Yeah, we are sorting that. You can see the idea that we have.
And we're trying entirely new things as well.
The direction that we're heading.
Yeah.
We are pushing all the boundaries possible to make sure that we democratize conversations in this country.
Right.
One conversation at a time. Mic on the ground, let's hear what the citizens are saying without being influenced by politicians. Mic on space and everywhere else. Let us hear what people are thinking and what they want to be the agenda. Let us engage here, one after the other, every single day. As we keep building this together, let's fix it together. Let's hear your feedback. This one worked, this one is not working, this one is perfect, this one is not perfect. Engage. We accept it all. Let's fix it together and let's all build a community of fixers, because this country has many fixers and all of us are fixers. One conversation at a time. We continue shortly. In the next hour, we are fixing what?
The dating culture. I know.
Self-love and relationships is what we're focusing on. And Julie Gaither will be joining us shortly, a podcaster and somebody who likes to look at reflection in the bigger picture. So we'll have that conversation. It is still Valentine's Day, so we'll come back shortly on Fixing the Nation.